Good evening. Welcome to MUFON Los Angeles. My name is Steve Murillo. I am the State Section Director for MUFON LA. We have an extraordinary program for you tonight. T.L. Keller is here with us. T.L. Keller is an aerospace engineer, a historian, and an author. He's a graduate from the School of Engineering at UCLA. He's a former computer systems analyst at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. In 1986, he designed SpaceMax, Space Station Construction Simulator, a project management computer simulation. He also has worked for British Aerospace, Douglas Aircraft, the Titan Corporation's Advanced Development Division, Space Launch Corporation, and Universal Space Network. He has worked on projects for the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Air Force, AFRL, NRL, and DARPA. In 2010, he authored The Total Novice's Guide to UFOs, What You Need to Know. It's a great book. I own it. His next book will be The Total Novice's Guide to Evolution, Creation, and Intelligent Design. So that'll be an interesting one. Looking forward to that. Please put your hands together for T.L. Keller.
Some of you are not going to like what I'm going to say tonight because what I am going to say will seem unbelievable to some of you. And I understand that because it's therefore unacceptable. Some of you will say, well, you know, some of this stuff I can believe, but the other stuff I don't know about. And the rest of you will say, well, I've known it all the time. All right? Okay. What you're going to hear this evening is really a personal journey of discovery. I explain to you, after all of that business of the various aerospace companies that I've worked with, I have never come across anything having to do with anti-gravity, with UFOs, or extraterrestrial beings. I'm sorry, that's just the truth. Well, I've been on a number of interviews, actually dozens of interviews, and the host usually asks, how did you get started in UFO research? And I said, well, it started when I was 8 years old. And I would come home at the end of the day from school and I would watch a program called Space Patrol. Does anybody remember that at all? One. Remember Commander Buzz Corey and Cadet Happy? Good for you. This was about a small crew manning a rocket ship, and they would zip around the galaxy and take care of bad guys and save spacefarers who were in distress. A couple of years later, when I was 10 years old, I was in 5th grade, one of my schoolmates gave me a book called Flying Saucers Have Landed by George Adamski. You've read it too, right? Yeah, okay. And then shortly after that, Major Donald Kehoe came out with his one of several books. The one I read was Flying Saucers from Outer Space. Major Kehoe was a pilot, a former Marine pilot, and he had a number of contacts in the Pentagon. And after I read that at age 10, I realized that there was a reality to UFOs. What we're going to be talking about tonight really is not about extraterrestrial UFOs, although those are real too. The topic tonight is the Antelope Valley Area 51 connection. And basically it consists of what I'm going to be talking about is the U.S. Anti-Gravity Technology Program. Here are the topics. We're going to cover the Antelope Valley. And if I say something that's incorrect about the Antelope Valley, you tell me. Lockheed-Martin Skunk Works. Then what I've called the Secret Saucer Base Expeditions. RCS stands for Radar Cross-Section Facilities. Northrop Grumman, we'll be talking about stealth and anti-gravity technology, and then the famous Ben Rich 1993 UCLA lecture. About that time, I think it'd be a good point to take a break. Then we'll talk about the Tikaboo Valley in Nevada, Groom Lake, Project Aquarius, Project Galileo, Papoose Lake and the S4 facility, level 1, and then the S4 whistleblowers. All right, where is the Antelope Valley? I'll have to just point here. This is the 5 freeway. Going north from Los Angeles, you take the 14 freeway all the way out to Palmdale, and then here's Lancaster, and up here is Mojave. I'll be talking about that. And then I'm going to be mentioning Edwards Air Force Base up here, and then a small town called Llano, and then about out in here is Helendale. And at about this point in Kern County, I'll be talking about a facility called the Anthill. The Antelope Valley can be very beautiful, as you can see, but also has lots of wind sometimes, and it gets a little warm. Believe it or not, these are some, but not all, of the aerospace companies that are in the Antelope Valley. Lockheed-Martin, Northrop Grumman, Boeing are all in Palmdale. The U.S. Air Force and NASA are out at Edwards Air Force Base. And then out in Mojave, at Mojave Airport, you have Scaled Composites, BAE Systems, and the Spaceship Company. So this is really America's aerospace R&D workshop. This is the Palmdale facility. It's on the Sierra Highway in Palmdale of Lockheed Martin. And the gentleman that you see over on the right there, on the far right, is Kelly Johnson, who was the mentor to Ben Rich. Ben Rich took over at the Lockheed Martin Skunk Works when Kelly Johnson retired. You notice one of his quotes here. It says, Kelly Johnson said, "Be quick, be quiet, and be on time." Now, in the aerospace industry, they say that you can have schedule or cost or performance. And actually, you can have any two of those, but you can't have all three, if that makes sense. And if you notice, he says, be quick and be on time, that's schedule, and be quiet, but he doesn't say anything about keep the costs low. That's your taxpayer dollar in action. Lockheed Martin over the years has produced any number of craft, both aircraft and sea craft. Now most of you probably recognize the U-2 over here. This was why Area 51 was established, to be able to test the U-2, which was originally advertised as a high-altitude research aircraft, and of course it was used as a reconnaissance aircraft over China and Russia. The craft in the right-hand corner is called the Sea Shadow, and about 18 years ago I had a chance to ask Ben Rich, the former president of Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, about this, and he said that they built this for the U.S. Navy as a stealth ship, and he said they took it out for a cruise and checked it out and then didn't know what to do with it, and so then they mothballed it. Now, as a trained engineer, that's the last thing that any engineer who has developed a device or a tool or a craft wants to do. You perfect something and then they put it on the shelf. That's not what we want to do. Engineers want to prove it and use it. Keep that in mind. Around the early 90s, maybe 1991, I was at the UFO West Expo at LAX. And there were two gentlemen standing behind a table, and they had a big banner. It said, "Secret Saucer Base Expeditions." I had to ask what that was. And I introduced myself, and behind the table was Gary Schultz and Norio Hayakawa. Does that ring any bells with anybody at all? Yes. Where did you meet Gary? Norio. Did you? Oh, very good. Did you go to the ones that he organized himself, the two of them? No. Okay. They were in Los Angeles. Gary is the one in the tie. And I always mention Gary and Norio because they helped me sort a lot of this out. And it's not an easy thing to do. First of all, they said that they would take us to a series of secret bases in the Antelope Valley. They said that these bases were originally designed to do one thing, but they were also being used for doing something else. And that something else was basically developing and fabricating flying discs. So I said, well, I was living in Lancaster at the time. I lived there for about 6 years. And I asked them, well, let me join your tour. And they said, I said, where is it? And he said, well, we meet next Saturday in Lancaster. So I said, terrific. That's convenient. So this was the first a radar cross-section facility that they took us to. And that's officially what it's called. Basically, what they do is they mount on one of these pylons a model of whatever craft they want to test. And then they basically fire radar waves at that model, and then they measure the bounce back. And obviously, the less bounce back, the more stealthy that particular craft is. Now, Gary said we were going to go out and take a look at one of these facilities, and it had a moving building on rails. And we finally got up to a top of a hill, and this is the moving building. It's actually on rails. And what they do is they have there's a pylon inside this facility. They mount a model inside of it, and the facility, the actual structure, the shelter there is to keep them from being exposed to too much wind or sun or prying eyes like we were. And this happened to be owned at the time by McDonnell Douglas. And Gary told us that this facility had an underground structures where they were also building, as I said, flying discs. Well, that didn't seem to be too impressive to me, but one thing that did look a little unusual is from our angle, we were able to see the craft that was mounted on the pylon, but inside the building, and it had a manta ray design. This is a close-up of the Lockheed-Martin facility in Helendale. And it just shows roughly what they look like. Some are taller than others. And you mount a model. It could be full scale or it could be quarter scale, whatever. It doesn't make any difference, really. And this is how they measure the bounce back of the radar signals. The next facility that he took us to was in Helendale. Now this is the eastern side of the Antelope Valley, and it's difficult looking at this photograph how big this actually is. There's one pylon here and one pylon there, and then this is the control area, the control buildings where they have the radar dishes mounted, and then they fire the radar down towards the model, wherever it might be. Now, in 1993, I asked Ben Rich, I said, you know, in Helendale, you have a massive underground facility. Massive. And I said, what do you do down there? And he said, it's a model shop. Well, to get an idea of the size of this, just look at this structure right down here. That is the entrance to the underground facility. 2-lane road, a very large door, some model shop. Now let's talk about the Northrop Grumman facilities. Do we have any aircraft spotters in the audience? No? No one wants to volunteer? Okay. Well, the left in the upper right there is not the B-2 stealth bomber. That is Jack Northrop's YB-49 flying wing, which was built in the late 40s. And this is a rather historic photo because this is Jack Northrop right here, surrounded by the B-2 design team. Now this is a photograph of the B-2. And on March 2nd, in the issue of March 2nd, 1992, I believe, issue of Aviation Week and Space Technology, there was an article that said that the B-2 leading edge was being positively charged. In other words, think of a battery. You have plus and minus, right? Okay, two different charges. And the article said that the leading edge of the B-2 was being charged with a positive charge. And it also said that the exhaust gases were being negatively charged, presumably for stealth purposes. Well, does that, do we have any physicists in the audience that might have an idea of what this might be? What is it? Exactly. I asked what it was, and he said that it's an electrogravitic propulsion technique. And let me explain this. This is a little hard to do here. Okay. Now, this is basically how it works, and it's called the Biefeld-Brown effect. And basically, if you have a metal plate like this on top, and you have another metal plate on the bottom, and you charge the top plate positively and the lower plate negatively, and if you put in a dielectric in between, a dielectric is simply a material that does not conduct DC current. All right, so you've got this charged positively on top, negatively on the bottom. The effect was that the disk will rise vertically. Or, put it another way, if you charge the front of something positively and the back of something negatively, it'll move in the positive direction. I hope that's reasonably clear. Now, what happens if the B2 there moves a little faster once you charge it that way? Well, what happens is it will make it, the velocity a little faster. Now, the B2 has 0.95 Mach, which means it's just under the speed of sound. Now, by applying those charges, does that mean the B2 is supersonic? I can't say that. But I can say that charging it with a positive on the front and negative on the back will create what they call a gravity well in front of the plane and a gravity hill on the back of the plane. And it will essentially, the B2 would essentially ride a gravity wave. And if the pilots pull back on the throttle, in theory, this might just ride a gravity wave once it's stabilized its speed and consume a lot less fuel. Think about it. Now, this is a photograph of T. Townsend Brown. If you'll notice, he's holding something similar to what I just had. And he and Dr. Paul Biefeld discovered this effect. Brown started researching it in the late 20s, And they continued on until they demonstrated this effect to the Navy in Pearl Harbor in 1953, and then suddenly his entire project went black. In other words, no one heard about it anymore. Now, since we don't have any aircraft identifiers in this audience, to look at this little craft here. Any wild guesses as to what that might be? Well, that is a is a drawing that's been imposed on this, obviously. And this is the world's first stealth fighter bomber. Built in 1944 by the Horten brothers in Nazi Germany. It's the first stealth fighter bomber. This is what it looked like. It's almost like a mini B-2, isn't it? And I can assure you that before Northrop Grumman built the B-2, they fully studied the Horten 9. Sometimes it's called the Gotha 229, and sometimes it's mistakenly called the Horten 229. Now, in the upper left-hand corner, this is the first flight of the Horten 9. I would imagine in around 1944. The photograph in the upper right-hand corner is what Horten 9 looks like today. You can actually see this at the Paul Garver Restoration Facility in Suitland, Maryland. This is a restoration facility of the Smithsonian. You have to make an appointment to go there, but you can see it. Now, remember, I just said that Northrop Grumman studied the Horten 9 very carefully. What you're looking at is a full-scale radar cross-section model built by Northrop Grumman before they actually manufactured the B-2, and they fully studied it. And as you can see, the lower right-hand corner, you'll see the full-scale RCS model mounted on a very large pylon in a facility called the Anthill. Now, when the Horten 9 first flew successfully, Reichsmarshal Goering gave the Horten brothers an immediate assignment, and that was to build the Horten 18, the Horten 18 stealth bomber. Now, this bomber was intended to deliver the atomic bomb to New York City and Washington, D.C. in 1946. The drawing in the lower right-hand corner is modeled after many of the German plans that were found after the war. I don't know that they actually fabricated any flying discs, but they were certainly thinking about it. Now, one point that I'd like to make is that if Nazi Germany was concerned about intercontinental stealth bombers, stealth fighter bombers, what they call the death ray during the war, that would be a laser today. They were researching atomic bombs, the hydrogen bomb. Why not anti-gravity? Doesn't that make sense? Basically, gravitation had been studied. Gravitation had been studied since the 20s in Germany. Dr. Walter Gerlach led those research studies. And in 1944, allegedly, there was a Nazi German research project located on the border of Poland and Czechoslovakia. It was located inside the Wenceslas mine, where they had located this device that you see on the right. It was about 9 feet in diameter and maybe 12 to 15 feet tall. And I might also add that it had some rather unusual script around the outside. What was this intended to do? What was that research project all about? First, they wanted to significantly reduce the amount of oil that was imported into Germany. Secondly, they wanted to research anti-gravity. And the third reason was they wanted to develop a war-winning weapon. They called it a Kriegsendenden. Pardon the German, but that's as close as I can come. That means decisive for the war. And this was the highest level of priority in Nazi Germany at the time. Well, what was it? The outside shell was a ceramic. Inside, they had a device which rotated. There were 2 drums that rotated. And the liquid inside was what they called red mercury. It was cooled by liquid hydrogen or liquid nitrogen, and it was also powered by a high voltage line that came from a power station outside the mine. And when it operated, it put out a blue glow. Now, just outside the mine, there was this round facility, perfectly round, and it was in sort of a trough. And there were high voltage lines coming from a high voltage generation system that was also located very close by. Now, some of the local people said that they observed a dark barrel-like device approximately in the location of this circular structure that went up vertically to some height, hovered, and then came back down. I might then mention that Dr. Walter Gerlach and a Dr. Kurt Debus were 2 of the very few people on this team that escaped at the end of the war. Nazi General, or I should say SS General Hans Kammler assigned an execution squad to execute everybody else in this team. By the way, Dr. Kurt Debus was brought to the U.S. as part of Operation Paperclip, if you know about that. And he later became the director of Kennedy Space Center. And he was an electrical engineer, no less. Now let's get on to the Northrop Grumman facility. This is located just over the Kern County line. It's owned by Northrop Grumman, and it's called the Ant Hill. And according to the stories that Gary Schultz told me, this facility was built in 3 phases. The first phase was this section right here, and then some years went by, and then according to Gary Schultz, there were a number of concrete trucks that were lined up outside this facility. And as each truck approached the main gate, the driver would get out and someone else would take over the concrete truck, and they would enter this building here. And they would be basically lifted down to whatever had been added to this facility. Supposedly, there are 7 underground levels. And they brought in concrete truck after concrete truck, and so there is supposed to be, this is why they call it the anthill, this is supposed to be a large underground facility. The last phase of the construction were sections over here. Now, my former wife was a State Farm agent in Lancaster, and she still is. And so we met a number of people in the aerospace business. And one of them happened to be a pilot, and he called my wife one day and he said, would you like to go on a flight around the Antelope Valley? And of course we accepted right away. And I said, well, where can we go? Anywhere you want. So I said, okay, let's go to Llano, Hellendale, and the Anthill. So we flew over all of these facilities. Now, the day that we happened to overfly it, this was open. In other words, it was like an ICBM silo cover. If you can imagine that, it's sort of like a clamshell that opens up. In the case of an ICBM site, they open up the doors and then they launch the missile. Well, I could actually see these doors open, and of course it was black down there. I couldn't see anything more. But there is definitely a facility for opening these doors. Now, this is what Gary Schultz saw one evening when he was standing up on the hillside there, just watching the anthill facility. His claim is that he was watching this and the doors opened. He could then see a light inside and a flying disc elevated out and left the scene very rapidly. Believe it or not. Now, you can actually do that yourself. There is a plateau up above the anthill, and there is a road leading up there. It's not easy to find, but all of the directions to these RCS facilities are in my book, and that's described as well. Now, a little bit later on, a few years later on, I had an opportunity to meet Mark McCandlish. Has he had a chance to speak here at all? No? Yes? He's been here. Okay. Mark McCandlish is a very talented technical illustrator. And you've probably seen his artwork in Popular Science, for example. He had a very close friend of his who he met in grade school. And his name was Brad Sorensen. Now, as the story goes, this is sort of an anecdotal story, but as the story goes, Brad Sorensen was asked by Frank Carlucci, who was then the Secretary of the Department of Defense, to go with him to Norton Air Force Base. This is some years ago. And during the Thunderbird show, they were also having an air show. So during the Thunderbird part of the air show, Secretary Carlucci took Brad Sorensen to what they called the big hangar. And they walked inside. No one really challenged Frank Carlucci. And inside they had 3 flying discs, all in operation, untethered, hovering above the ground. They had a little bear, they had a mama bear, and they have a papa bear. Generally speaking, 25 feet in diameter was the smallest one. The next one was 60 feet in diameter approximately, and the other one was 140 feet in diameter, all hovering without any external power or support. Unfortunately, a friend of mine by the name of John Williams, who happened to be a colonel in the Air Force at the time, was actually based at Norton at the time. And unfortunately, he couldn't be here tonight, but he could give you the same story. Anyway, when Brad Sorensen got back and had a chance to talk to Mark McCandlish, he described what the smallest device looked like. And this is Mark McCandlish's version of that. This is a very large capacitor down here. These are oxygen tanks. There are 4 seats up here. There are no windows. Everything is done with cameras. This is like the remote manipulator arm on the space shuttle. It's in the storage position here, but it basically comes out and can grasp something. Now, this column contains something. Any guesses what it might be? Sorry? Well, that's part of it, but the point is it happens to be mercury. Does that ring a bell with the Die Glocke? That had red mercury inside. All right, we're now going to talk about the fairly well-known Ben Rich lecture in 1993 at the UCLA Alumni Center. I was invited by a friend, and we had no idea who Ben Rich was. It was supposed to be just somebody who was going to give a history of Lockheed Corporation and Lockheed-Martin. But anyway, we went to such things and had no idea what to expect. Keep in mind that the Skunk Works manufactured the SR-71 Blackbird, and as you can see, the F-117, plus many others that I won't mention tonight. He started showing some slides, just like I am. And after a while, he said this. He said, if you can imagine it, Lockheed-Martin has done it. Now, you know, I'm an old science fiction guy. As a kid who was 10 years old, right? And I used to watch all of the science fiction films and read the science fiction novels, and so I have a big imagination. That's the thing about science fiction. It opens your mind. And if you haven't realized that to date, you ought to look into it from that point of view. It opens your mind. Well, then he showed a few more slides. And then he asked the audience, how are we going to get to the stars? Now, someone earlier asked about this rocket that's supposed to go to the moon and Mars in 2025. Well, I've got news. We're not going to the stars using rockets and chemical propellants. Sorry. This is the answer to his own question. How do we get to the stars? He said, not by rockets and chemical propellants, but by using a new technology. Then he proceeded with a few more slides. And then he said this. Lockheed-Martin now has the technology to go to the stars. Was he joking? You know, was he joking? No, he had cancer. And he had less than 2 years to live. And to me, he was saying these things almost like a pre-deathbed confession. Now, what does that all mean to you, to anybody? Was he just making up to maybe increase the stock value of Lockheed-Martin? I don't think so. Yes, what? How are they doing it? Well, it's basically, I believe that there are several different methods of achieving anti-gravity. And what they've done is essentially to retrieve crashed extraterrestrial craft and re-engineer them, retro-engineer them, understand how it works, and then build an alien reproduction vehicle. Now, last slide in the presentation was this: an artist's conception of a flying disc. Does anybody have any doubts still? Okay, well, after his last slide was shown, they went through a Q&A, and the audience left the auditorium. And the person that invited me to this meeting, who happens to be Jan Harzan, the state section director for MUFON Orange County, followed Mr. Rich to the exit door. No one else was around. And Jan said, "Mr. Rich, how do UFOs work?" And Ben Rich said, "Well, you tell me. How does ESP work?" And Jan said, "Well, everything in space and time is connected." And Ben Rich said, "That's how UFOs work." Now, to me, that means that they travel by folding space-time, because everything in the universe is connected. Now, this is a photograph of Jim Goodall. He's a well-known aviation historian, author, and as you can see, he's restoring a SR-71 here. And he happened to be a very personal friend of Ben Rich. Unfortunately, the video that I want to show won't work. I don't think, but we'll try. And basically, I will explain what he said if it doesn't show. Well, anyway, it shows on my PC. Jim said that he was at Ben Rich's last 10 days, basically at his deathbed. And he said, apparently, that what we've done is to retrieve UFOs, crashed extraterrestrial craft, recover them, understand how the engineering, and then recreate them or reproduce them. And they're called alien reproduction vehicles. It's too bad we don't have the video. Okay. Now, I'd like to talk about what I call the Ben Rich analogy. We have some of our greatest scientists and engineers here. Enrico Fermi, he was Italian. We have Hermann Oberth and a bunch of former Germans as our great German scientists. We have Carl Sagan and Ben Rich. Now, Enrico Fermi was very interested in, besides nuclear energy, he was very interested in extraterrestrial civilizations. And he did some calculations as to how many extraterrestrial civilizations with advanced technologies would be existing now. And he basically came up with a question, where are they? Now, who knows what he thought about UFOs in his private life, but in public, he did not acknowledge them. But that was his question. Sometimes it's called the Fermi paradox. Then, 4 years later, Hermann Oberth, who, along with Werner von Braun, who you can see just over his right shoulder there, and a few other German scientists and engineers, Hermann Oberth was called or considered to be by many to be the father of German rocketry. And in 1954, he said flying saucers are real and they are spaceships from another solar system. That's quite a statement for a rocket scientist that's fairly well known. So let's fast forward to Carl Sagan. If you remember in 1980, he would always come up on the show and say, well, there are billions and billions of stars. And that means there are billions and billions of planets. And Carl Sagan always acknowledged that many of those planets had extraterrestrial life, intelligent life, and technically advanced. But he would always say that UFOs aren't real because the distances are too great. Now we come to Ben Rich in 1993, and he says Lockheed-Martin now has the technology to go to the stars. Well, what happened between 1954 and 1993? That magic 40 years. Probably quite a bit. My only question is, what happened with Carl Sagan? Did he lose the plot or what? Well, personally, I agree with Bud Hopkins. If you've read Bud Hopkins' book, Art, Life, and UFOs, Bud Hopkins was a contemporary of Carl Sagan. In fact, they even debated. And Bud Hopkins always said, well, Carl knew that UFOs were real, but he had to say that they weren't real because he was being fed and funded by the US government for his own projects. Well, what's the Ben Rich analogy? My only point here is that if in 1993 we had the technology to go to the stars, then it strikes me that any extraterrestrial intelligent civilization that's technically evolved, that's as old as our planet is, could easily come here. And if they're a million years ahead of us, then what might that mean? Does that mean that they've been here quite some time? Maybe? Well, think about it. All right, I think this might be a good time for a break, if that works with everybody. Steve earlier mentioned that these are available. These are drawings by Michael Schratt, and they contain many black project drawings of devices that have been manufactured in the Antelope Valley and tested at Area 51 and S4. It's $2, but I have spent hours looking for it over it myself. The next thing is that if any of you were at the symposium 2 weeks ago, maybe you heard Ted Loader. It was an excellent talk. And he talked about his abstract that he wrote to the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. This is a reproduction of his abstract, if you're interested. It also contains an article which I wrote for the MUFON UFO Journal. And as Steve mentioned, I am selling Tim Good's Need to Know separately, but if you are willing to go for the bigger one, I will include Tim Good's book as well. And I make this offer to everybody. I guarantee what you receive, and if you feel that you don't like it, you can send this book back and I'll refund your money and you can keep Tim Good's book. So I don't know what more I can offer. You won't find that from many other authors. The reason why I sell Tim Good's book is that Timothy Good is a very good friend of mine. He's a British writer. He first started writing in the about 1980s, and he's put out some excellent work, including this one. This one is tied directly to what I'm talking about tonight. It's called Need to Know: UFOs, the Military, and Intelligence. Okay, now, you know, I talk to many members of the general public, and they say this about Area 51 or that, and sometimes this is sort of the image that they have of it. It's not exactly what it looks like. And some people think that there's this big hangar where this odd-looking device can just take off from its position here after this big door opens. But it's not like that either. Now, this is an aircraft sectional chart for Area 51. Right now, I'll just talk about, try to put it in terms of Groom Lake. The facility is based at Groom Lake. And if you were to buy an aircraft sectional chart, it's quite clear as to the limits where you cannot fly into. So if you're a pilot, don't try to fly over Area 51. They will shoot you down. Honest. Officially, it's called the Air Force Flight Test Center Detachment 3. How do you get there? Well, it's in Nevada, first of all. And you start in Las Vegas. You go out the 15 here. And then you take the 93 up to this point, and then you get onto the extraterrestrial highway that's 375, and eventually you'll come to an overlook of the Tikaboo Valley. And this is what the Tikaboo Valley looks like. This is basically where we test our new aircraft and otherwise. When you get to the top of that peak, you will see this very straight dirt road that goes directly to the foothills in the back. It's totally unmarked. Don't expect any signs saying Area 51 this way or something like that. Eventually, you'll come to the Area 51 signs. I would suggest that you, at this point, that you just stop there and not go any further. In 1989, my former wife and I took a trip out here. Now, this is before anyone knew about, quote, Area 51. And we went all the way out to the end of that road and finally came up to a chain link fence with a guardhouse. And there was an Air Force truck there, and the guardhouse had one-way mirrors, or one-way glass. And they didn't come out to greet us, but I'm sure they took our license numbers down. So then we turned around and started driving all the way back out. And then as we were out of the foothills, low and slow from the north came an F-4 Phantom fighter from the base. And they were simply, I'm sure, counting the numbers of heads in the car and making sure that the same two people that went in came out. This is what the base looks like from Freedom Ridge, taken years ago. I've given credit to John Lear on this one. I believe he's the one who took that. There are some very large hangars out here, and we'll have an inside look at them in a few minutes. This is what it looks like from a satellite view. This is Groom Lake, and this contains has the longest landing strip in the world. I believe it's 27,000 feet. Now, one of the benefits of living in the Antelope Valley and having my wife in the insurance business was that I met a lot of people that were in the aerospace business. It's an aerospace town out there. And I met one person who claimed that when he was in the Air Force, he flew from the Far East in a cargo aircraft carrying a MiG-21. And even though this may look like a Republic F-105 Thunder Chief, it is actually a MiG-21 with Air Force insignia. And this is how we are able to produce the Top Gun program down near San Diego at Miramar, because the pilots would come here, they would fly the MiGs. This just happens to be one MiG-21, but they have endless others, I'm sure. And they found how to fly it and its limitations, and that's how they're able to teach our pilots to outdo the foe. The next, this is a proof of concept for the F-117A. This was tested out there. This was called Have Blue. Now this is Bill Sweetman's version of what he thinks the Aurora looked like. And this little beauty down in the lower right-hand corner is the Lockheed-Martin Boeing B-3 advanced or super stealth aircraft. Now, about 20 years ago, 21 actually, I had a chance to meet Bob Lazar out at the Little Alien in Rachel, Nevada. And I realized that some people in the, quote, UFO community feel that Bob Lazar is a fraud. Did I hear a yes? Okay. Well, I have to say that he seemed like a very mild-mannered, technical person, somewhat retiring, and he seemed to have a story to me. He claimed that he was hired on by EG&G to retro-engineer an extraterrestrial craft at a facility called S4. And this is the extraterrestrial craft that he described. He called it the sport model. So I will have to say that he's certainly a controversial person without any question. In fact, this is Bob Lazar right here, along with Gary Schultz. And in the early 90s, when I met Bob Lazar, he said that if I would go out to into the Tikaboo Valley on Wednesday night, any Wednesday night, basically, he said that there's a very good chance that you'll see some of these devices being tested at the facility that he called S4. Now, he said S4 is roughly 12 to 15 miles south of Groom Lake. And he claimed that there were 9 hangars there, basically embedded into a mountain in the Papoose Range, and on Papoose Lake. Now, all I know is that I joined Gary's secret saucer base expeditions many times. I've lost count as to how many times I've been out there. And sometimes, frankly, nothing would happen at all. Sometimes the guys at S4 would send up flares just to get us excited. Imagine that. You go all the way out there and they send up flares. But on certain nights, you could see what I've called here night lights. And you would see these red-orange, brightly colored lights that would ascend vertically. They'd go to the left, they go to the right. They would not follow a standard flight line like an aircraft. Sometimes they would wink out, sometimes they'd wink on. And we saw this any number of nights on repeated expeditions. Now, the truth is, I don't know if that facility there is called S4 or R2 or D2. I have no idea. It could be called anything, but most people seem to think that S4 is the name. But I can tell you this, there is a facility there. Now, one night, Gary Schultz, typically what he would do is he had a small camera, film camera, with high-speed film in it, and he would go out there and he'd click at that light and click at that light and click at that light, and he would have all of these develop. Now, one night when he was out there, he saw a red flashing light just hovering, and this is what came out. This is high-speed film, push process. That's why it's so grainy. But I think it's clearly not something that we would normally see. Just to get a sense of this, Groom Lake is in the upper right-hand corner. You can see part of Groom Lake and the runways and the hangars. And then the S4 facility is on Papoose Lake under one of the mountains in the Papoose Range, about 12 to 15 miles or so. Now, this is where I have to make a disclaimer, because I'm going to be talking about 3 people who claim to have worked at S4. I don't know if they did or not, but I'm just going to tell you their stories. You can make up your own mind. Bob Lazar claimed that he was brought on by EG&G and that he actually was paid by naval intelligence. And he was brought in to back engineer the sport model. The next gentleman is Captain Bill Uhouse. He is a former Marine pilot, mechanical engineer, and he claimed that he was brought in to develop and install a flight simulator. And the flight simulator was to simulate a flying disc. And this is Dr. Dan Burish. His claim was that he worked at S4 as a microbiologist. Now, I'm not going to go into biology tonight. We're just talking the technical side. By the way, Captain Bill Uhouse is mentioned in Ted Loder's abstract and he is also one of Dr. Stephen Greer's witnesses. According to these folks, this is Project Aquarius, and the administrators of the Office of Naval Intelligence and the Defense Intelligence Agency. These next few drawings were drawn by Michael Schratt of Open Minds magazine. Now these, according to this, if you land at the heliport on a helicopter from Groom Lake, he said this is what you call walking the line. You have to carefully walk between the blue lines and not go beyond the red line. Now what you see over here on the left under the mountain are the 9 hangars starting from the left, and then there's other rooms just as you come through the door. Sorry? Basically, it's a very tight security. The guards are told not to allow anyone to go beyond the red line. That's about all I can say. This is the entry area to S4. You can see this long entry area and a waiting area. My recollection was that Bob Lazar said that there was this X-Files poster, but it said, according to him, they're here. Honest. According to the testimony, is that the first few offices on the left are for propulsion and for avionics laboratories. And then you walk on down further, and you pass through 1 or 2 doors. And according to these folks, this is what you see in Hangar 1. This is what Dr. Dan Burish referred to as a sport model. And this is where we also have some matchup here with what Bob Lazar said. Hangar 2 contained a identical copy of the sport model. Hangar 3 was said to contain the Roswell craft, and as you can see here, it has a tarp over it. Yeah, this is Jim Nichols' version of the Roswell crash retrieval. Sorry about this. Okay. It's always good to have laughter in a program like this because it's a rather serious topic. Okay. Hangar 4. This is what was referred to as the Orion craft. Now, don't ask me why it was called the Orion craft. Michael Schratt, who interviewed Dr. Dan Burish, doesn't know. But anyway, that was my question. Where have we seen something like this? Sort of looks like the Fluxliner alien reproduction vehicle that Mark McCandlish drew. Hangar 5, I believe that's the one that was empty as well. Let's see, Hangar 6. Now, this is sort of interesting. They claim that there was an alien reproduction vehicle of the Roswell craft. And it looks sort of like that. Now, you might just do a design comparison between the alien craft from Roswell and the F-22 Raptor, which happens to be a Lockheed-Martin product. Michael Schratt's comment was that if you took off the two vertical stabilizers, removed the engines and the air intakes, and you extended the wings from the wing tip to about here, it would fairly closely simulate the Roswell craft. Of course, the Roswell craft ARV would have to also include some different propulsion. Hangar 7 was claimed to be the Kingman craft. It also was covered by a tarp. Now my guess is that if this is true, the two craft that are covered with a tarp are ones which were damaged in one way or the other. And this is an artist's illustration of what some believe the Kingman craft looked like that crashed in 1953. That's Kingman, Arizona, by the way. Hangar 8 was what they call the licorice drop. Michael tells me that this was a very highly polished black, sort of a triangular pyramid-shaped device. Does anyone think that that looks like something they might have seen from some other incident? Jonathan Reed? Oh, I'm not familiar with him. Is that right? Rendlesham. Well, that's the one from the Rendlesham Forest. And it was triangular, a pyramid, and according to the descriptions from the various Air Force investigators, it was black and highly polished. The only thing is that I asked Michael if the licorice drop had any kind of script around it, and he said no. But he thought that it might be possibly a derivative of it. Now, let's get to something a little bit more exciting here. This is what Bill Uhouse claims that he developed and installed. It was a flying disc flight simulator. And it was supposed to be modeled after the Kingman device. Basically what we're looking at is a 1 foot diameter shaft with a 3 foot diameter ball bearing, for lack of better words. And what would happen is that there were 6 very highly charged capacitors inside this simulator. And one of the operators was over here, and what they would do is attach this power umbilical cord, recharge the capacitor, and then disconnect that. And then the pilot would enter, and these are called snubbers. They sort of stabilize the craft when it's not in motion. And the idea is that it has a full yaw, roll, and pitch. Now, I guess the question then becomes, why not just have 1 or 2 test pilots out there to fly these devices and leave it at that? Why have flight simulators? Any guesses? Sorry? In case it crashed? Well, that's true. But what I'm trying to suggest is that Bill Uhouse claims that this device was installed in the early 60s. Training. There we go. Now, that's the point I was trying to get to. What my perception is that this is a device to train our Air Force pilots and Navy aviators. And we've been doing this for decades. Now, there are probably, I would say, in my opinion, a lot of pilots pass through here and learn how to fly these devices? And why would we train so many people to fly these devices that we have reproduced? All right, you remember this, right? Here's Commander Corey, and there is Cadet Happy. And they used to zip around, and they were sort of the police, the military police of the galaxy. It's one of my favorite programs. Is it possible? Is it just possible that we have many pilots who are flying a number of these alien reproduction vehicles? Yes? Okay. Are you with me? Okay. And what group might be in charge of that? Well, it's not the Space Patrol, I'll tell you that much. But what they call themselves is, excuse me. Well, hold on just a minute. I forgot this point. Sort of an important point. This was in 1950, okay? And that's when I was about 8 years old. This, I'm sure some of you recognize, as a scene from Forbidden Planet. Actually, it's a drawing by Jim Nichols. But there is a scene very much like this as a space cruiser carrying a military team to rescue the scientists on Altair 4. This was done in 1956. Okay? 1950, rocket ships. 1956, space cruisers disc-shaped. Now, the point being is here. It took 2 years to produce that film. So they had to start around 1954. Now, when you're writing a book or you're producing a film, someone's got to write the scripts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm saying that it probably took at least a year, maybe a year and a half, to write the scripts and get set up before they can film. So this may have started, the effort for this may have started in 1952, maybe 53. Now, for those of you who are old enough to remember what was happening in 1952, maybe you can tell me what happened in 1952. Washington, D.C. Who said that? Who? Who said that? Oh, very good. Excellent. Because in 1952, UFOs in some quantity overflew the Capitol in Washington, D.C. And I'm 68 years old. I remember this. And there was fear in the minds of the general public because the Air Force couldn't control the airspace. Fear. Not panic, but fear. I remember that quite clearly. So what I'm saying is, in 1952, between 1950 and 56, when this film came out, you had what happened in 1952. And that's why you had a number of proliferating films coming out of Hollywood about UFOs, some better than others. But, okay, let's go on. Okay, now here we're back to Space Patrol. And my question was, well, what do they call themselves? And they don't call themselves Space Patrol, although they probably should. Actually, what they call themselves, is Naval Space Command. And they call themselves the U.S. Air Force Space Command. Now, let me just ask a question here. What do you think this is, this little tripod thing, I mean a triangle thing? Star Trek. Oh boy, we got a Trekker out here. Oh yeah, I saw the first episode in 1966 too, so. Right? Are they saying something here to us? Are they trying to teach us something? Is this a subliminal message? Try this one for size. This represents peace. These are olive branches. And this is obviously space, right? You add to that the Star Trek symbol, and that gives you this. Notice the same symbol is being used here, the olive branches. CNSA, what does that stand for? Wild guesses. Chinese National Space Administration. They're Trekkies too. Yeah, I'm sure they are. I hate to tell you this, but this is the Chinese century. All right. Now, so we have two space commands. Since both the services agree on the term Space Command, and from my experience in working with the Navy and the Air Force, when two services work together, they usually put the word joint in the front. So I'm suggesting that maybe, just maybe, they call themselves the Joint Space Command, or JSPACOM. Maybe you won't buy it, but to me it makes sense. Now, this one's called, Can You Handle the Truth? And the truth, of course, is in quotes, so. What I'm suggesting here is that the United States has basically a small fleet of alien reproduction vehicles of different sizes, shapes, and configurations. And yes, maybe they're triangular. And maybe they're big. Why would you want a big spacecraft? To haul little ones, that's right. And to haul cargo, and to haul space modules. Right? Now what I'm saying is here, if you're a taxpayer, you have been paying for this for the last 6 decades. And what I'm suggesting is, yes, I think, in my opinion, we have a base on the moon right now. As I said before, engineers don't want to develop a device or a tool or a craft and put it on the shelf. They want to use it. And I think that's what we've been doing for decades. And how about a base on Mars? Wouldn't that, you'd probably need a fairly good sized craft to transport what you need with the crew and everything else. And I am going to take Ben Rich's word for fact. And I say, yes, we've also traveled to the stars. Now, at this point, I wanted to show Eisenhower's farewell address. Eisenhower wasn't just a president, he was a two-term president, and he was also a 5-star general, that's as high as you can go in the U.S. Army. And he knew the military and he knew industry after all those years. And what he did in 1961, and I don't think this will play, but nope, it's not going to work. Well, oh, okay, well, anyway, it worked at home. Okay, anyway, what he did is this. Just a few days before he left office, he warned us all about the military-industrial complex. And who better to warn us than Eisenhower? And when as a 19-year-old, I thought he was just talking about the American military-industrial complex. I think if he had to say that same speech again, he would say, beware of the international military-industrial complex. Now let's talk about this. We have a problem here on Earth, and it has to do with energy. We have too much invested in the oil business. I like to call it big oil. And some people may say, well, you know, what do you know about oil? Actually, I used to work in Saudi Arabia for Aramco. So I've seen the oil as it comes out of the ground, and believe me, it just gushers out there. They don't have to pump it. I've seen the pipelines that take the product down to Ras Tanura, where it's loaded onto a super tanker. I've been on super tankers. I've seen the offloading facilities, more pipelines, refineries, distribution centers, tanker trucks, and your local gas station. I worked for Mobil Oil Corporation at their headquarters in New York City years ago. So I think I have a pretty good handle on big oil. This is something that we need to solve. And from my point of view, the sooner the better. Now, there's an ad running on television from ExxonMobil, and it has a petroleum engineer or geologist, I think it is. A geologist stands up and he says, we have enough natural gas to pump for the next 100 years. And when you think about it, they probably have enough oil in oil sands and oil shale to also pump for another 100 years. But I question, can this planet take this for another 100 years? To me, the solution for the energy crisis is to release the U.S. anti-gravity technology to the world. Because I know that there is technology in the black world that, if made available to the public and to the world, would solve virtually all of our pollution problems. I think we could eliminate virtually the demand for coal, gasoline, heating oil, diesel, aviation fuels. How many more of these events do we have to go through? This is Chernobyl, by the way. And that's the Gulf oil spill up there. The point being is that there is technology which would provide low-cost, pollution-free electrical energy for just about everybody that could afford, say, maybe $5,000 for their home, for use at their home. All right, in summary, let me just go over this. We are and have been for decades developing and manufacturing flying discs in the Antelope Valley. And we've been testing recovered UFOs and alien reproduction vehicles at whatever facility is called in Nevada, whether it's called S4 or whatever, I don't know. There are two types of real solid UFOs, those that are manufactured by us and those that are manufactured by others beyond Earth. There are actually two space programs. Imagine that. And as taxpayers, you've been paying for this for a long time. The white space program is what I call NASA, the space shuttles, the International Space Station, the Mars rovers. All of that technology is antiquated. It's all rockets and chemical propellants. The black space program is basically recovered UFOs, ARVs, and what I've termed J-SPACOM. We now have the capability, according to Ben Rich, to travel to the stars. But according to him also, is that control of this program has been passed from the U.S. government to an international board of directors. And we now have the capability to solve Earth's energy crisis. So what can you do about all of this? Well, first of all, don't believe a word that I've said tonight. Don't believe it. Just keep an open mind. Follow up, study up, get engaged. Talk to your friends. I found this quite revealing. People sometimes that don't want to talk about UFOs, but if you ask them what they think about UFOs, they will be quite often quite excited about it. I would suggest you write to your congressperson. Don't email, just write a letter. You'd be surprised how effective letter writing can be if they get enough handwritten letters in quantity. Personally, I've written congresspeople. I've even sent copies of my books to a variety of different congresspeople. Support the Disclosure Project. And I would suggest that you read Open Minds magazine. I found that to be quite helpful, particularly for people that are just sort of joining this, subject. And generally, get involved. Now, just in case some of you think that my book only has to do with alien reproduction vehicles and S4, you can forget it. This happens to be a couple of pages from my book, and these are illustrations from Linda Moulton Howe's glimpses of other realities that she published some years ago. Also, Michael Schratt has a DVD, and he discusses not only level 1 of S4, but he also talks about the other 4 underground levels, and he has extensive drawings and diagrams and illustrations in this DVD. You can get it from my website, totalnovicesguide.com. Now, not very many of you have ever been out to Area 51. It just so happens that in mid-October of this year, Tony Cisneros and I will be conducting a tour out to Area 51, starting in Las Vegas. And we're going to be going out to the Little Ailey Inn and all the way up to Tonopah and taking in the entire Nellis gunnery and bombing range. If any of you are interested, go to topsecrettours.com. The Little Alien is where we're going to be staying only one night. It's like a half-star motel. but hey, it's the experience. It's the experience. All the other hotels are 3 stars or 4 stars. Now, some of you, yeah, I know. He said trailers. Yeah, they're trailers. But it's only one night. But in any case, that's Top Secret Tours. They also have a tour out to New Mexico. And they go to Roswell. They go to the Roswell Air Force Field. They go to Alamogordo. They go to Trinity Site. They go to Los Alamos. It's quite a trip. The one to the Area 51 is a 5-day trip. Okay. That pretty much does it. I want to thank you all for listening to what I had to say.